The Estes Viking model rocket is one of the most versatile on the market today. And if you've never built one of these, I highly recommend doing so. In fact, build a few of them, because as you can see in the instructions here, there are lots of different configurations. So you can build this as a 3-fin, a 4-fin, or a 5-fin rocket. And the fins are such that you can turn them in just about any direction and they'll still be stable. Now they do recommend that you always keep your fins going all in the same direction to maintain stability, but there are even possibilities of using multiple fin configurations on the same rocket. And they can still be stable, although you do need to make sure and check that before flying them. So there are at least 18 different configurations, more than what are shown here. But what if you had 2 Viking rocket kits? Well, my local hobby store a little while ago had a clearance sale on the educator packs of Viking kits. And so it was 12 kits, 2 a box, and each box was less than $15. So I was paying about $1.20, $1.50 per rocket, and now I've got a whole bunch of rockets. Well, I am going to use some of them for education, but the thought occurred to me that we could actually do some experimentation with these as well. So in the next several videos, I'm going to look at different ways that we can combine 2 Viking model rocket kits to make a single rocket. Now, anytime you do this, you don't have the guaranteed stability that a pre-manufactured kit has. So you'll want to make sure and check very closely the stability of your rocket before you fly these. All of these that I'm going to show in this series of videos have been flown artificially in RockSim and have been shown to be stable. However, always check this yourself. Differences in building techniques, in glue and paint and such, could result in different results than what I got. Now I am going to limit myself to what's in each kit. I'm not going to bring in any outside parts, with one exception. Okay, the kits come with streamer recovery, and you would think, well, okay, if I put both streamers in for a bigger kit, that'll still work. And in some cases it does, but not in all. In a few cases, the rocket may be heavier enough, or it may just simply be kind of awkwardly gangly and have lots of parts sticking out, that streamer recovery will not bring it back safely. And I will show a few instances where we replace the streamer with a parachute. But otherwise, we're going to go with the stock parts. Now, one other thing to be aware of, depending on how old your kits are and how long they've been sitting on the shelves, they may come with a plastic nose cone, which is the modern one, or a balsa nose cone, which is found in older kits. Now, as I was going through my kits, I actually found several that still had the balsa nose cone. For the most part, this won't make any difference, but again, be sure to check stability, because as you can see, they are of slightly different lengths, and they're also slightly different masses. So always check that before you fly. And with that, we'll proceed to this build. In this build, we're going to put 2 body tubes side by side in a tandem fashion and create a cluster rocket. So once again, we'll need 2 complete kits here. And first, I'm just going to start with the body tubes. So we will need engine blocks, and we'll also need the spacers to start with. And once again, be sure to check that the nose cones for both of your kits are the same. Okay, which in this case they are. And so the first thing I'm going to do here is put in the engine blocks. And I still have an engine spacer from a previous build here, so I'm just going to cross out my old lines. All right, and we're going to go with the 1/2 centimeter spacing here. And then into each tube we'll go ahead and put our engine blocks in. Okay, so once again here I'm going to take my applicator and just measure that against my engine spacer here, and that will give me the proper distance to glue. Okay, and then I'm going to do this quickly in both tubes. Okay, so a little bit of slop there. So there's my first one, and I'll find my mark here. Just slide that in to the mark and withdraw it. And then the same thing with this one. Okay, and then I'm just going to make sure and remember which end I have, so I'm just going to write aft on here. Okay, now we'll let those dry for a few minutes. In the meantime, we can assemble the 2 nose cones. Now this will still work if you have one of the older kits that has the balsa nose cones. Just make sure you assemble them as shown in the instruction. Alright, for our nose cones we simply need some tube type plastic cement, and we'll simply run a bead just on the inside surfaces here. And then just take each base and just give it a little twist as we apply it. Okay, and then we can just set those aside to let them dry. And the next thing we need to do is mark our fins. Now this is going to be a little unusual in that we're going to use the 5-fin configuration, but we're only going to put 3 fins on each tube. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this. There's one there, and one there. So we want 3 adjacent fins, because what's going to happen is when the 2 tubes are together like this, then we'll have a fin sticking straight out horizontally and then one at a diagonal on each side here. And so we'll have a total of 6 fins going all the way around. So I'll do the same thing over here. Okay. Now, once again, the fins come in this piece of cardstock. You just have to cut these out. I actually have enough fins left over from previous builds that I've already cut mine out here and sanded those. If you need more help with cutting these and sanding, go ahead and go back to the original Viking build video that was posted much earlier, and that will show you how to do that. Alright, but otherwise, all we need to do now on the body tubes is mark our fin lines. And again, this is a little marking guide that Estes makes. If you don't have one of these, a door frame works perfectly well. Just hard to get a door frame under the video camera. Alright, and then now, as we've shown previously on these videos, I will simply put a little bit of glue here on the root edge. Alright, and then I'm going to stick that briefly on. And now I'm going to wait 60 seconds to let that get tacky, and then go ahead and attach it back on. And then I simply repeat that for all the fins on all the body tubes. So I'm going to go ahead and do this now, and then when we come back I'll have all the fins on. Right, the fin joints have dried enough. You can see they're still a little wet on some of those, but they're in place well enough that I can go ahead and start on the fillets here. The fins on the other body tube are still drying, so this gives me something to do in between. And so once again, we'll simply add a little bit of glue here. And then smooth those in. And we'll want to do this before we glue the two body tubes together. But we won't do the launch lug until afterward. Okay, so I'll set this aside to dry, and then as soon as the other tube has dried its fins, I will apply fillets to it as well. The fin fillets are done on both sides of the rocket, and my next step now will be to join these two like this. And so I'm going to eyeball this first of all and just see how close we can get this. And if you're off a hair, a couple of degrees here or there, it's still going to work. Now I'm going to use a clothespin here on both ends to keep that together. Alright, and I'm going to do a little fine manipulation here. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is, while they're stuck together, I'm going to run a pencil line down in the groove. I'm going to do this for both sides, and this will tell me where I need to put the glue in. Alright, so then I'll flip it over and do the same thing. Okay, so now I have two regions where I want glue to be. And we don't have to fill in the entire region. This is just going to be a boundary to limit where I put my glue. I'm just going to run a bead of glue down one side here, in the middle, more or less. And now I'm going to place these back together. I want to do it as close to my original as I can here, so I'm going to line up the lines. Okay, and then go ahead and realign the fins. And then I can put my clothespins back on. Okay, now that caused a little bit of movement. Okay, and then we also want to make sure that they are aligned lengthwise. Alright, check my fin alignment again. Pretty good. Alright, so now I'm going to allow this to dry once more. I'm going to put the launch lug right about here between the two tubes, and this side has more glue on it, so I'm going to use the side that has less glue so that I don't end up having the glue interfere with the launch rod. And I'm going to go ahead and use both launch lugs for this, just to ensure that we get a good stable launch off of the rod. Because since this will be a cluster rocket, there's always the chance that one engine ignites a little bit sooner or later than the other one. And so a little bit more strength and stability while it's on the launch pad is a good thing. Okay, so I'm going to put this one down close to the base. I got a little sloppy with my glue there. Okay, and we will put fillets on the launch lugs, and once the launch lugs are in place and we can see exactly how much room we have to work with, we may be able to put a little bit of a fillet down inside there as well. All right, and then my other launch lug is going to come up fairly close to the forward end. So I'm going to stick that right about there, about a centimeter or so from the very end. We'll let the launch lugs dry and the body tubes dry, and once those have set up a bit, we'll start installing the recovery system, the shock cords, and tying those up to the nose cones. While the body tubes are still drying, I'm going to go ahead and set up the shock cords here. And in some of these builds, I've used the slit method, where we simply run the shock cord through the body tube and anchor it that way. That's going to be more difficult with the tandem tubes here. So I'm going to go ahead and just use the regular SD shock cord mounts here and apply some glue to them. I have some tissue handy here. Now we'll just make a film of glue. Place the first shock cord in, and if you've seen me do this before, you'll know I do this at an angle. And this helps the shock cord lay flatter. And that's especially important here where we don't have a really big body tube to begin with. Okay, squeeze the glue all through there. And give it a little bit of a bend. And that one's starting to come apart. Alright, now I'm going to take my body tube here and I'm going to leave the aft clothespin in place. Right, and again, this is the farther you can get these down, the better. And if you have big, thick fingers, it's going to be a little more difficult. Just be warned. Right, so I'm going to go ahead, put film all over that. And actually, as I think about this, I'm going to put them on the outside. It just gives a little more space between them when they eject. Okay, and now I'm just going to press down in there. And you can also use a dowel or the handle of your hobby knife here. Just be careful not to cut yourself. Get that good and seated. And again, it probably doesn't matter which side of the tube you put this on. My hope is that having them on the opposite sides on the outer part will prevent them from tangling quite so much, but that might just be wishful thinking. Okay, and now we'll just let those dry in place. You could attach the nose cones at this point. I'm going to wait because I want to paint my nose cones a different color than the rest of the rocket, and it'll just be easier if I haven't attached those yet. If you are ready to do that and put on the streamers can simply be taped into place. So just use a piece of, probably electrical tape works best here, and you just tape it onto the shock cord. And I would recommend doing this at different levels for the two shock cords. So maybe do one about halfway down and then do the other streamer up close to the top. And again, that's just mainly to help keep them from tangling in each other. It's going to be most effective if both streamers are flying freely and not interfering with each other. Okay, the glue that's putting the tubes together is mostly dry. It's not completely cured yet, but it's fine for our purposes. Now for the fillets here, I'm going to use some white glue this time rather than the wood glue, simply because it's a little runnier and can work its way down farther. And I'm going to use as little of this as possible here, because I don't want it interfering with the launch rod. So I'm just going to run this in. And I know my finger's not going to go in here. So instead, I'm going to use a little applicator stick. So I'm just going to use the stick here of one of my applicators and use that to work the glue in as much as we can. Now as I move this through, you're seeing a wave on either side. We'll take care of that in a minute. But this really can't be very thick at all, or it's going to run into the launch rod. So now I'm just going to take a bit of tissue here and wipe out most of that excess. And this is another reason to use white glue, is the wood glue tends to stick so quickly that you may not have time to wipe it all off. Alright, and if there is any that remains too high, we can take that down with a little bit of fine sandpaper. Okay, I'm going to add just a little touch back here. And depending on how perfect you like your fillets, you may need to do this more than once. Now on the non-launch lug side, one, the glue is thicker on this side, so I'm going to not do this quite yet, but I can go ahead and use the wood glue for my fillets here. And so I'll do that while the video is off, and then we'll come back. This will be pretty much ready to assemble. Now my fillets still have several hours to dry. In fact, I will let this dry overnight before I paint it. But this is what it looks like fully assembled. Now, this is a cluster rocket, and you really don't want to try and launch this with one engine. Theoretically, if one engine failed to ignite, it would still be stable enough that it would be reasonably safe. However, if you ran this with just one engine, that would make it very unstable. Of course, by all means, use a small set of engines on your first flight. I recommend either the A83 or the half A62. And I hope you had a good build and have a good launch and flight.